The first letter came on a Wednesday, folded neatly into an envelope stamped with the Homeowners Association seal. Mark Bennett almost tossed it into the pile of bills on the counter, but the bold red letters across the top made him pause. Notice of violation. His stomach knotted before he even opened it. He had been too tired to mow the lawn for a couple of weeks, the grass rising knee-high in places, but it never crossed his mind that it was more than a small neighborhood annoyance. Apparently, to the Homeowners Association, it was grounds for war. Mark unfolded the paper, reading slowly as though each sentence weighed heavier than the last. It accused him of failing to maintain his lawn to community standards, citing grass exceeding 6 inches in height. The fine started small, $75. But it wasn't just the money. At the bottom of the page it said, in cold type, "Failure to remedy may result in a lien placed against the property." A lien. For grass. He laughed bitterly and shoved the paper aside. It was absurd. Surely they wouldn't go that far. By the time his wife Elena got home from her double shift at the hospital, the letter was buried under pizza coupons and utility bills. He didn't want to add to her exhaustion. She was already carrying enough, 12-hour shifts on her feet, the stress of covering their mortgage while his mechanic shop struggled to find work. Mark told himself he'd mow tomorrow, maybe Saturday at the latest. But tomorrow became next week, and then it rained, and then his mower sputtered out mid-cut, coughing smoke. He didn't replace it. He couldn't. Money was tight, and every dollar was earmarked for keeping the lights on. The second letter was harsher, with numbers circled in red. $250 fine. The association warned that fees would continue to accrue daily until compliance was met. They included glossy photos of his yard, grass waving like wild weeds, as if they'd caught him committing a crime. This time Mark felt his throat tighten. He stuffed the letter into a drawer, muttering that he'd fix it soon. But the weight of unpaid bills and late notices already filled that drawer. The thought of one more problem was suffocating. The third letter didn't just threaten, it declared. A lien had been placed on his property, effective immediately, for unpaid community fines and fees. And the number printed in bold at the top made Mark's head spin. $1,850. How did a few weeks of unmowed lawn turn into nearly $2,000? His hands shook as he read the legal language outlining how the Homeowners Association had the right to pursue foreclosure proceedings if the debt remained unresolved. He dropped into a chair, letter dangling from his fingers. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about grass. They wanted his house. Elena found him sitting there in silence. When he handed her the paper, she read it twice, her face going pale. "They can't do this," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. She worked in healthcare, not real estate law, but she knew enough to see that the words on the page were binding. They weren't empty threats. They had the machinery of law behind them, and they had everything to gain if Mark and Elena lost. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring out at his lawn lit silver under the moon. It didn't look that bad to him, just a bit overgrown, patches of dandelions and clover, the kind of lawn a man with real problems might have. But he noticed something else. A black SUV rolled slowly down the street, pausing for a moment in front of his house. The driver snapped photos before moving on. His skin prickled. This wasn't about neatness. It was surveillance. It was control. The next morning, his neighbor Luis Ortega waved him over. Luis was a retired postal worker, a man with laugh lines etched deep into his tan skin. But today, his smile was gone. "You got the lien notice, didn't you?" Luis asked, voice low, glancing around as if someone might be listening. Mark nodded, feeling the shame rise in his chest. Luis sighed. "You're not the first. They've been pulling this stunt for years." Luis explained how the Homeowners Association worked with a local law firm to weaponize liens. They'd start with small fines, grass, paint color, mailbox rust, and let them balloon with interest and late fees. Then, when the homeowner couldn't pay, the property would be foreclosed on, auctioned off cheap, and bought by investors. "I lost 3 friends this way," Luis muttered. "One of them's house sold for 1/3 of its value. Guess who bought it? The HOA president's brother-in-law. They're not protecting property values. They're flipping homes. Mark's jaw clenched as anger replaced his fear. His house wasn't just wood and drywall. It was the only security his family had. He worked himself to the bone to afford the mortgage. For some board member to take it because he couldn't mow the lawn for a month felt obscene. Elena listened as Luis spoke, her tired eyes sharpening into fury. "We should fight this," she said. "But how? Lawyers cost money they didn't have. And the HOA's lawyer, Richard Kessler, was infamous for burying people in paperwork until they gave up." 2 days later, Kessler himself arrived. He stepped out of a shiny black Mercedes, his suit immaculate, watch gleaming. He carried a leather briefcase and a smirk. Mark met him on the porch, fists clenched. "Mr. Bennett," Kessler said smoothly, "I'm here to inform you that unless your balance is paid in full, foreclosure proceedings will commence within 90 days. He handed over a thick packet of papers, filled with terms and statutes Mark barely understood. But he didn't need to understand every word. The message was clear. Pay up or lose everything. Mark's voice cracked as he shouted, "Over grass? You're trying to take my house over grass?" Kessler's smile widened. "It's not about the grass. It's about compliance. Communities thrive on order. Without order, property values decline. Without property values, we all lose." He tapped his briefcase. "Unless you want to watch your equity evaporate, I suggest you write a check. Quickly." Then he turned, walking back to his car as calmly as if he'd just dropped off a dinner invitation. When Elena joined him on the porch, she squeezed his hand, but her own fingers trembled. "We can't let them do this," she whispered. Mark stared at the foreclosure packet in his hands, the weight of it crushing. He knew Luis was right. This wasn't about lawns. It was about money, power, and in a system designed to strip people of their homes. And now, that system had its sights on him. That night, another SUV rolled by. This time, Mark didn't just watch. He stepped out onto his porch, arms crossed, staring them down. The driver lowered the window, camera flash bursting in the dark, before speeding away. Mark's chest burned with rage. They wanted him scared, silent, compliant. But he wasn't going to make it that easy. As dawn crept across the lawn, Mark sat at the kitchen table with Elena and Luis. The papers were spread out before them, the foreclosure terms, the fines, the line notice. Elena sipped her coffee, dark circles under her eyes. Luis leaned forward, voice low. "If you want to fight them, you're going to need proof. Real proof. That means digging into their records, finding the money trail." "Anti." Mark swallowed hard. The thought of going up against the Homeowners Association in court seemed impossible. But the thought of losing his home, his father's house, the one place his family could call their own, was worse. He looked at Elena, at the fatigue on her face, and then at Luis, who had seen too many neighbors chewed up by the same machine. He nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do." Nicholas. Luis cracked a sad smile. "Careful what you wish for, amigo. Once you start pulling at the threads, you might find things you don't want to know." Mark met his eyes. Steady now. Determination hardening. "Then let's start pulling." But none of them noticed the car parked half a block away, engine idling, windows tinted. Inside, someone was already taking notes, their camera trained not on the lawn, but on Mark himself. The fight had only just begun, and the Homeowners Association was already 3 steps ahead. Mark's first step was research. He stayed up late on his old laptop, searching phrases like HOA foreclosure scam and Homeowners Association abuse. The results flooded his screen with horror stories. Families who lost their homes over mailbox paint, elderly couples evicted for cracked driveways, veterans foreclosed on for weeds. His blood boiled with each article. It wasn't just happening to him. It was a system, a pattern, a machine built to turn homes into profits for those in power. Elena leaned against the kitchen doorway, rubbing her temples. "Mark, you're obsessing," she said softly. But when he spun the laptop toward her, showing a case wherein HOA foreclosed on a $400,000 house for $1,200, in unpaid fines. Her face tightened. That could be us. She pulled up a chair, and for the first time, the two of them worked side by side, not as a tired couple scraping by, but as investigators united against a common enemy. Luis Ortega offered them a starting point, the county clerk's office. Every line is recorded there, he explained. If you can pull records, you'll see just how many homes they've taken, and maybe who's been buying them afterward. His tone was cautious, but Mark caught the spark of rebellion in his neighbor's eyes. Luis had seen too many families destroyed to stay quiet forever. Maybe Mark's fight could be different. The clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. Rows of filing cabinets and humming computers filled the space. Mark and Elaine combed through property records for their subdivision, their eyes widening as patterns emerged. Dozens of properties foreclosed in the last decade. Each one started with minor violations: grass, paint, trash bins, snowballing into thousands in fees. And when those homes hit auction, they were snatched up quickly, often by LCs with bland names: Eastland Holdings, Crescent Investment Group, Key LAR Properties. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Those LTEs were all linked. Different addresses, different names, but mailing statements tied back to the same P.O. box downtown. Elena whispered, "They're laundering ownership, hiding who's behind it." Mark's hands clenched the file so tight the paper crinkled. He recognized one of the names, Richard Kessler, the HOA's attorney. He wasn't just collecting fees. He was profiting directly from the homes his firm helped foreclose. As they packed up the files, Mark felt the hairs on his neck rise. Someone was watching. He glanced over his shoulder and caught sight of a man in a navy suit pretending to read a newspaper in the lobby. The man wasn't reading. His eyes flicked to Mark and Elena every few seconds. Elena grabbed his arm. "Let's go," she hissed. They hurried out, their stack of photocopies clutched like contraband. That night, Mark spread the documents across their dining table. It looked like a conspiracy board, lines connecting properties, dates, buyers, LLCs, that why. Elena pointed to one house. "That was the Johnsons' place, remember? They said the HOA fined them for a trampoline in the backyard. 2 months later, gone." Luis stared at the papers, his jaw tight. "This is organized theft," he muttered. "They're bleeding homeowners, then swooping in to buy when people can't keep up." The more Mark looked, the more one truth settled in his chest. This wasn't negligence. It was strategy. The HOA was a predator, and homeowners were prey. But exposing it wouldn't be easy. Without resources, without legal backing, it was just another homeowner screaming into the void. Unless, he thought, he found someone with influence. Someone who wanted to bring the system down. He reached out to a local reporter, a woman named Dana Hughes who had written about housing scams. They met at a diner off the highway. Dana was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with a notepad always in hand. Mark slid the stack of records across the table, his voice low. "They're using liens to steal homes. Here's the proof." Dana skimmed the pages, her expression shifting from skepticism to grim interest. "If this is real, it's huge," she said. "But you need to understand, these people will come after you. They don't like exposure." Mark shrugged, though his chest felt tight. "They already came after me. I've got nothing left to lose." Dana tapped her pen, then nodded. "Okay, I'll dig. But you better be ready for a fight." Elena squeezed his knee under the table. She was scared, but she was with him. That meant everything. The fight arrived sooner than expected. 2 days later, Mark came home to find a notice taped to his door. Final warning. His unpaid fines now totaled $5,700. Unless he paid within 14 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The bold letters screamed at him, but what froze his blood was the last line. Any interference with HOA operations will result in legal escalation. Someone knew he was digging. That night, while Elena slept, Mark sat in the garage with the door half open, staring out at the street. The same black SUV crawled by, headlights off. This time, Mark stepped into the driveway, holding his father's old shotgun, not raised, but visible. The SUV braked, then reversed, tires squealing as it disappeared into the dark. His heart pounded, his breath ragged. It was a warning dance, a game of intimidation. But Mark wasn't about to blink first. The next morning, his shop was vandalized. Windows shattered, tools missing, spray paint across the garage door. Mind your business. Elena's face went pale when she saw it. Louis cursed under his breath, helping Mark board up the windows. They're pushing you, Louis warned. They want you scared enough to quit, or to lose everything. Mark swallowed hard, but his anger had burned away his fear. Then we pushed back harder. That evening, Dana called. Her voice was tense. I traced the LCS further. You were right. It all ties back to Kessler. But it goes bigger. He's flipping homes to hedge funds. Out-of-state money is flowing in using your HOA as a pipeline. If this story runs, it's not just your neighborhood. It could blow open the whole county's real estate racket. Mark felt adrenaline surge through him. Proof. Finally, something that could tip the balance. But before he could celebrate, headlights flooded his living room window. A car had pulled into his driveway, engine idling. Mark rose slowly, heart pounding. He grabbed the shotgun again, motioning Elena to stay back. When he stepped onto the porch, the driver's window rolled down. It was Richard Kessler. He smiled, leaning back casually, as though dropping by for a friendly chat. Evening, Mr. Bennett, he drawled. Heard you've been asking questions you shouldn't. That's dangerous. Mark's grip tightened on the shotgun. You can't scare me. Kessler's smile didn't waver. I don't need to scare you. The law is on my side. And the law is a hammer. You're just a nail. He revved his engine and pulled away, taillights glowing red as they vanished into the night. Mark stood there, shaking with rage, realizing that Kessler wasn't bluffing. He was daring Mark to swing first. Inside, Elena begged him to be careful. They'll destroy us, Mark. Please. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was in his hands. He stared at the papers on their dining table. The map of corruption sprawled like a battlefield. For the first time, he felt the weight of what Louise had said. Once you start pulling at the threads, you can't stop. And now, the whole fabric was unraveling in his lap. At midnight, Mark's phone buzzed with a new text. An unknown number, no name attached. The message was short. Drop it or lose everything. Beneath it was a photo, his own house, snapped from the dark, Elena visible through the kitchen window. Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal, and the enemy was inside his neighborhood. He turned off the phone and gripped the shotgun tighter. He wasn't sure if he was more terrified or furious. Either way, there was no going back. The Homeowners Association had made this a war, and Mark was ready to fight. Mark barely slept after the photo. Every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. Elena moved their mattress into the living room that night, closer to the shotgun propped against the wall. She didn't argue with him anymore about safety. The message had stripped away any illusion that this was just a paperwork dispute. It was a war waged on their home, their marriage, their sanity. By dawn, Mark was pacing the kitchen, coffee gone cold in his mug. Elena urged him to call the police, but Mark shook his head. And tell them what? That the Ho's lawyer texted me from an anonymous number? They'll laugh us out of the station. Besides, deep down, he didn't trust the local cops. Too many of them lived in the same neighborhood, sat on the same committees, owed favors to the same people. Dana Hughes, the reporter, called mid-morning. She was blunt. I spoke to a county clerk off the record. He admitted he's been pressured to expedite HOA foreclosure filings. Said if he didn't, he'd lose his job. This thing is deeper than I thought. Mark rubbed his temples. So what now? Dana's tone hardened. Now we follow the money. I want you with me when I confront one of the buyers. If you're in, meet me tonight. Mark agreed, though Elena's face was tight with worry. They already threatened us, Mark. Now you're going to poke the bear again. He touched her hand. They've already taken everything but this house. If we don't fight back, they'll take that too. I won't let Max and Sophie lose the only home they've ever known. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She understood. Survival was no longer enough. Justice had to mean something. That evening, Mark met Dana outside a sleek office building downtown. The logo read Crescent Investment Group, one of the LCS that had bought up homes in their neighborhood. Dana wore a blazer, her notepad tucked under her arm. Mark felt out of place in his grease-stained jacket, but his eyes burned with determination. Together they strode into the lobby, pretending to be nothing more than business visitors. The receptionist looked them up and down with suspicion, but Dana flashed her press badge. "We're here to speak with Mr. Levin," she said firmly. After some hesitation, they were buzzed upstairs. In a glass-walled office sat a man in his 50s with slicked-back hair, gold cufflinks, and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Journalist," he said, drawing the word out like an insult. "And a mechanic?" Mark stiffened, but Dana leaned forward. "We know your group is tied to dozens of HOA foreclosures. Care to comment?" Levin chuckled. "Comment. There's nothing illegal about buying foreclosed properties. It's a free market. If your friend here couldn't keep his lawn trimmed, that's hardly my problem." Mark's fists clenched, but Dana pressed. "You're hiding ownership behind shell companies. You're colluding with HOA lawyers. Isn't it true you buy homes for pennies and flip them to Wall Street funds for millions?" Levin leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Prove it." Mark slammed a file onto the desk, the photocopies from the clerk's office. "This is proof. I'm not the only one you've bled dry. You're running a racket." Levin glanced at the papers, then smiled wider. "Do you know how many desperate homeowners come through here crying about their lost houses? You're nothing special, Mr. Bennett, and let me give you a piece of advice. Men like me don't lose. We build empires on the backs of men like you." Dana's recorder clicked quietly in her pocket. Every word was captured. But before they could leave, 2 security guards appeared at the door. "Escort them out," Levin ordered. As Mark and Dana were shoved into the elevator, Mark caught one last glimpse of Levin's smirk. The man wasn't worried. That terrified him more than any threat. Levin knew he was untouchable, or thought he was. Outside, Dana exhaled shakily. "We got him on tape. That's something. But it won't be enough for prosecutors. They'll bury this unless we connect him directly to Kessler." Mark's jaw tightened. "Then that's what we do." He wasn't sure how yet, but the idea of letting Levin's arrogance go unpunished churned his stomach. Elena's face flashed in his mind. He couldn't fail her. Not now. When Mark returned home, Luis was waiting on the porch. The older man looked uneasy. "Mark, I heard something from a friend on the HOA maintenance crew. They're talking about fast-tracking your foreclosure. Kessler's pulling strings at the county office. You might have less than 2 weeks." Mark's chest constricted. 2 weeks? Luis nodded grimly. "They're scared, and scared men move fast." Elena nearly collapsed when she heard. She grabbed Mark by the shoulders, desperation in her eyes. "We have to leave, Mark. Take Sophie and go. We can't fight this." But Mark shook his head. "If we run, they win. They'll just move on to the next family. I won't let that happen." His voice cracked with conviction. Elena covered her mouth, torn between fear and love. That night, the neighborhood felt hostile. Porch lights flicked on as Mark walked Max, the dog barking at shadows. He noticed curtains twitching, neighbors whispering. Were they complicit? Afraid? Or just glad it wasn't them? Either way, Mark felt alone. Until Louise joined him, carrying a folder. "I dug up something else," Louise said, lowering his voice. "Years ago, a family sued the HOA for wrongful foreclosure. The case was sealed, but I know the attorney who filed it. She left town after threats. But I can track her down." Mark's pulse quickened. A sealed case meant evidence. A paper trail. The following day, Mark drove out of town with Louis to a rundown office park. They found the attorney, Miriam Keller, working part-time at a legal aid clinic. She was cautious, wary of strangers, until Louis vouched for Mark. When he explained the situation, Miriam sighed heavily. "I had a client, an elderly widow. The HOA fined her for chipped paint. They foreclosed, sold the house to an LLC. We found evidence the HOA board had financial ties to that LLC. But before we could go to trial, the case was sealed, and my client disappeared. I never saw her again. Oh, that they say. Mark's stomach nodded. Disappeared? Miriam nodded. She was gone overnight. No forwarding address, no family contact. Like she was erased. Her eyes darted nervously. You need to be careful. These people don't just play dirty. They play dangerous. Mark leaned forward. Then help us. Give us what you still have. Miriam hesitated, then slid a thin folder across the desk. I shouldn't be doing this, but if you're brave enough to try, maybe it's time someone finished what she started. The folder contained internal emails between HOA board members and Kessler's office. They discussed targeting vulnerable homeowners, ensuring fast-track filings, and maintaining investor confidence. It was damning, explosive evidence. Mark's hands shook as he read. Elena had been right. This wasn't about grass. It was a hunting ground, and he was just the latest prey. But now he held the hunter's map in his hands. Back home, Mark spread the new documents across the table. Elena stared at them, pale. This could destroy them, she whispered. Mark nodded. Or it could destroy us. Either way, we can't turn back now. The decision weighed heavy, but the choice was clear. The fight was no longer about saving their home. It was about blowing open a system of corruption that had ruined countless families. As midnight neared, Mark heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He peeped out the window and froze. Several cars had pulled up outside, engines idling, headlights aimed at his house. Figures in dark clothing stepped out, their silhouettes sharp against the beams. This wasn't intimidation anymore. It was an invasion. Elena clutched Sophie close. Louis reached for the bat he carried, and Mark grabbed the shotgun. His heart thundered as the first fist pounded on the door. The war had arrived at his doorstep. The pounding on the door echoed like gunfire. Mark's heart hammered in his chest as he held the shotgun tight against his shoulder. Elena pulled Sophie back toward the hallway, whispering soothing lies to calm her terrified sobs. Louis gritted his teeth, gripping the baseball bat like he was ready to break bones. Outside, headlights blazed, casting long, sinister shadows across the living room walls. A voice rang out, smooth but cold. Open up, Mr. Bennett. We just want to talk. Mark recognized it instantly. Richard Kessler, the HOA's attorney. He cursed under his breath. Kessler hadn't come alone. Dark silhouettes shifted in the glare. Men in black jackets with the stance of enforcers, not neighbors. This was intimidation ratcheted up to terror. Mark shouted back, "You're trespassing. Get off my property." His voice cracked, betraying both fury and fear. Kessler's reply was calm, almost amused. You think this is your property, Mark? It hasn't been for weeks. The Lien changes everything. Legally, you're already squatting. The words slithered through the door like poison. Elena covered her mouth, eyes wide. Louis muttered, "That's a lie. He's bluffing." But Mark wasn't sure anymore. The legalese had blurred reality, and Kessler knew how to twist it until homeowners lost their grip. The doorknob rattled. Mark raised the shotgun, but Louise grabbed his arm. "If you fire, they'll spin this as assault. You'll lose everything." Mark hesitated, torn between defense and entrapment. Then the pounding stopped. Silence stretched, thicker than smoke. When Mark peeked through the blinds, the driveway was empty. Cars gone. Figures vanished. Kessler had retreated, or regrouped. Mark exhaled shakily. The war hadn't erupted, but it was teetering at the edge. The next morning, a letter arrived by certified mail. Mark signed for it with trembling hands. Inside was a foreclosure notice, stamped and sealed by the county clerk. Auction date, 21 days away. Property to be sold to settle unpaid fines totaling $8,430. Elena gasped. $8,000? That's insane. But Mark's stomach dropped for another reason. The auction buyer was pre-listed. Crescent Investment Group. The same shell company Dana and he had confronted. He drove straight to Dana's office. The foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. She scanned it quickly, her eyes narrowing. They've already lined up the buyer. This was decided weeks ago. She jabbed the paper with her pen. See this clause? Waiver of homeowner redemption? That means once the gavel drops, you don't even get a chance to buy it back. They've changed the county rules to make sure you lose permanently. Mark's jaw tightened until it hurt. So they've rewritten the law for profit. Dana nodded grimly. And if we don't get this to the right people fast, they'll steamroll you. But Dana warned him about the stakes. If we publish, you'll be their target. They'll smear you, sue you, maybe worse. You saw what happened last night. Are you prepared for that? Mark thought of Elena's pale face, Sophie's trembling hands. Fear was a constant now, a weight in his chest. But fear had transformed into anger, into purpose. I don't care. Expose them. Burn them down. Dana nodded. Then we need more than documents. We need someone on the inside. That night, Mark and Lewis staked out the HOA clubhouse, a beige building that looked harmless in daylight but sinister under the street lamps. They watched through binoculars as board members gathered inside, sipping wine and laughing. At the head of the table was Clarissa Doyle, the HOA president, her diamond necklace glinting as she clinked glasses with Kessler. Mark's stomach turned. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were celebrating their empire of ruin. Louis nudged him. We need evidence. Mark swallowed hard, then slipped from the car, sticking to the shadows. He crept toward the clubhouse, heart pounding. A side window was cracked open, the faint hum of conversation leaking out. Mark slid his phone through the gap, hitting record. He caught fragments. Auction pipeline, investor confidence, liquidation quota. His pulse spiked. These weren't neighbors. They were businessmen in disguise, running a racket from behind manicured lawns. A sharp creak made him freeze. Someone had spotted him. A guard, or worse. Mark bolted back toward the car, Louis yanking the door open as he dove inside. Tires squealed as they sped away, adrenaline roaring in their ears. But Mark's phone was still recording, capturing the damning phrases he hoped would finally break the silence. When he replayed the audio, his breath caught. Clarissa's voice rang clear. As long as Richard keeps the judges on our side, these homes are ours for the taking. The next day, Dana listened to the recording, her eyes wide. This is gold. Bribery, collusion, racketeering. It's all here. But we need a judge brave enough to act on it. She tapped her pen. There's one. Judge Alvarez. He's been pushing back against foreclosure abuse. If we get this in front of him, it could blow the whole case open. Mark clenched his fists. Then let's do it. But nothing came easy. When Mark tried to file the evidence, the clerk refused to accept it. Missing forms, she muttered, avoiding his eyes. Mark leaned closer. They got to you, didn't they? She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Furious, Mark stormed outside, where Louise handed him a folded note slipped under his truck's windshield. The handwriting was blocky, almost childish. You're playing with fire. Stop before you burn. Elena begged him to quit. She cried at the dinner table, whispering about Sophie's nightmares, about waking up to phantom knocks at the door. Mark's resolve wavered, but then he looked at the foreclosure notice pinned to their fridge. 20 days. That was all the time they had before Crescent owned everything. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not with so many families already destroyed. 2 nights later, Mark and Dana met secretly with Judge Alvarez in a dimly lit diner. The judge was weary, dark circles under his eyes, but his voice was steady. I've suspected Kessler for years, but suspicion isn't proof. What you're bringing me could change everything, if I survive long enough to rule on it. Mark's breath caught. Survive? Alvarez gave a tired smile. You think you're the only one they threaten? They've burned my car, vandalized my office, but I'm still here. He tapped the folder. Give me more, and I'll take them down. Mark left the meeting with equal parts hope and dread. There was a path forward, but it was narrow and dangerous. He drove home late, headlights bouncing across dark fields. When he pulled into his driveway, he froze. His garage door was wide open. tools scattered. Inside, spray paint across the wall. Time's up. His stomach dropped. They weren't just threatening him anymore. They were accelerating the clock. The next day, Mark's mechanic shop received a surprise visit from city inspectors. They cited him for a dozen code violations: oil disposal, fire hazards, equipment placement. Fines totaled nearly $10,000. It was coordinated, obvious retaliation. Elena nearly collapsed when she saw the papers. They're not just taking our house, they're taking our livelihood. Mark's hands trembled with rage. The HOA had turned the entire system against him. It wasn't just a line anymore. It was economic annihilation. That night, as he sat in the darkened garage, Mark made a decision. He couldn't wait for the system to save him. He had to strike first. Luis and Dana agreed. Together, they mapped a plan: break into Kessler's law office and retrieve direct proof, contracts, kickbacks, anything that tied him to the hedge funds. It was reckless, maybe even criminal. But at this point, legality was just another weapon the HOA wielded. Survival meant crossing lines. As they whispered over blueprints, Elena stood in the doorway, pale but resolute. "If you're going to do this," she said, voice trembling, "then do it right. And don't come home empty-handed." Her eyes glistened, but there was fire behind them. Mark kissed her forehead. "I promise. We end this or we don't come back." The plan was set. Tomorrow night they'd break into the fortress that had orchestrated so many ruined lives. And if they failed, the foreclosure hammer would fall, crushing them once and for all. The night of the break-in smelled like gasoline and cold metal. Mark's hands were numb as he checked the small lead on the lockpick set one more time. Luis drove the van and kept the engine running in the shadowed alley behind Kessler's law offices. Dana sat in the passenger seat, phone flashlight off, eyes scanning the empty street. Elena had convinced herself to stay home for Sophie's sake, though her fingers trembled as she kissed Mark's cheek. "Be careful," she whispered, voice raw. He mouthed he would, then disappeared into the black with Luis like a ghost who had traded sleep for war. They slipped through the side gate with the ease of practiced trespassers and pressed against the red brick wall until the night swallowed their shapes. Kessler's office had an alarm, and they'd timed the guard shift pattern with the help of Evan, the jittery telecom guy who owed no favors but wanted justice. A soft click in the alley. Then again, the receptionist's side window, old and warped, finally yielded to a shim. Mark slid in headfirst, breath shallow, and felt the thick rush of cooled AC and paper scent hit him like a rebuke. The law office smelled like money and secrets. 2 floors up, they moved like shadow surgeons. Dana's hand was steady as she clicked photos of inboxes, of manila folders stamped with Kessler and Partners. Luis's gloved fingers rifled through drawers for the addresses the foreclosure auctions fed into: Shell LTs, P.O. boxes, transfer orders. Mark found what made his lungs tighten: a spiral-bound ledger titled Investor Pipeline, Kunwine, and a spreadsheet with line items that tied Lien amounts to auction dates and buyer LACs. Names repeated like a taxonomic chant: Crescent Investment Group, Eastland Holdings, KLR Properties. Every foreclosure fit a pattern. The ledger even had notes: insure redemption waiver, confirm clerk signature on 312. Mark took a photo of the spreadsheet with the little burner camera Dana had given him. The flash was a benign blue dot. In the dark, it looked like a signal flare. They'd planned for minutes, not hours. The sound of boots in the hall made Mark freeze. Too close now. "Go," he hissed. They ran, knocking over a filing cabinet in their rush, a metallic groan that seemed to unfold in slow motion. The stairwell felt endless. When they burst into the alley, the van's engine puttered and roared, and they clambered in like fugitives and disappeared into the night. Their treasure trove of evidence was raw and jagged: audio of board meetings annotated with dates, bank wires with routing numbers traced to an escrow account, invoices for remediation that were nothing but shell transfers to Kessler's personal accounts. Dana uploaded encrypted copies to a secure server and sent the link to Judge Alvarez, and the federal investigator contact she'd cultivated. "We don't have much time," she said, fingers flying. "If we don't file this properly, it'll be suppressed." But the machine pushed back. The morning paper splashed a different story, an op-ed slamming the reckless vigilantes who broke into a respected attorney's office. Within hours, Kessler's team had retained a media firm and painted Mark as a criminal, a trespasser who had endangered confidential client files. The county clerk's office suddenly announced urgent reviews of privacy breaches and suggested the Bennett foreclosure proceed while the security investigation completed. It was theater. Attack with dirt while trying to bury the facts that mattered. Mark watched the avalanche of spin with a fury that tasted like iron. He and Dana had prepared legal filings that would be sealed with a federal judge's temporary injunction, but those papers needed to be lodged before Crescent bid at the auction. They raced the calendar. Weeks collapsed into a blur of courtrooms, late-night document transfers, and whispered meetings in diner booths where the coffee always tasted like adrenaline. Judge Alvarez held an emergency hearing in a cramped courtroom packed with neighbors and press. The air smelled of old wood and public expectation. Mark sat at the table, shoulders muscle-strained as Dana laid out the evidence, emails showing Kessler's correspondence with Crescent executives, the ledger with matching auction dates, and invoices that indicated kickbacks. The judge's face was stone, but he listened. Then he did something that made Mark's chest feel as if someone had opened a valve inside it. He froze the auction and ordered a federal inquiry. "No sales, no transfers," Judge Alvarez intoned. "Not until the SEC and FBI have had access to these records." The courtroom erupted. For a few hours at least, the engine that had been grinding down families stalled. Neighbors sobbed. A few laughed. And Elena cried openly in the gallery, her hands pale and clasped around Sophie's school supply list. Mark peeled a layer off his face and let himself breathe. The reprieve felt immense. The foreclosure auction had been stopped. Crescent's pipeline was clogged with subpoenas and warrants. They had won, visibly and legally, a small victory against a bruising machine. But victory left a wound. With the inquiry public, the villains became surgical and furious. Kessler's law partner retorted by filing counterclaims against Mark for trespass and data laundering. Crescent issued a press release slandering Dana as an unethical journalist who solicited private records. And worst of all, Mark received a certified letter from his mortgage servicer, a notice that the lien, while contestable, had triggered a force-placed insurance rider. His escrow account was being billed again, and unless he paid an immediate $12,000 to cover the HOA's protective costs, the mortgage servicer would declare technical default. The predatory geometry shifted from open aggression to legal chokehold. At night, when the house finally quieted, Mark and Alina would sit at their kitchen table with the latest stack of papers and plan the next move in whispers. Luis helped with logistics. He knew local process servers and the small bureaucratic cracks you could wedge into. Dana negotiated with national outlets who wanted the story. "This is the narrative everyone's missing," an editor told her. But they demand on-the-record interviews and exclusive access that would have endangered Elena and Sophie. Mark turned down the offers that required more exposure than he could stomach. He'd won a legal pause, but not a safe place to live. Then the twist no one saw coming. One of the Shell LEC, Kalar Properties, had ties to a municipal bond underwriter in the neighboring county. That bond issuance, anonymized in SEC filings, held the mortgage-backed strip that bought Crescent's portfolios wholesale. In English, it meant that a broad chain of public pension money and institutional investments had been funneled into this predatory loop. Their cul-de-sac was not an isolated corruption, but part of a leveraged financial product that touched thousands of accounts, and one misfiring headline could ripple into fiscal alarm. The stakes were enormous. Dana called that discovery the golden thread. "If we pull it, we pull the whole cloth apart," she said, voice bright and exhausted. They sent an anonymous tip to the SEC whistleblower portal with the encrypted ledger as evidence. Within a week, federal auditors came knocking. Subpoenas were served at Kessler's firm, Crescent's headquarters, and even at the county clerk's office. The walls that had protected the scheme began to thud under the hammer of legal process. But the system's muscle was not all law and headline. Sometimes it was quieter, lethal in its ordinary cruelty. The night before the federal agents arrived at Crescent, someone set the Bennett's mechanic shop on fire. The van that Louis used to transport evidence was gutted. The flyer Mark had taped to telephone poles, exposed, whole links, was shredded along the sidewalks. The local NDACP leader who'd agreed to speak for the neighbors got anonymous calls threatening to ruin his reputation. The message was consistent. Resistance had costs. Then came the auction day that was never supposed to happen. A rogue deputy at the county, allegedly pressured or criminally complicit, attempted to process a replacement sale, a clandestine auction that would transfer the property as if the injunction had never been issued. The sheriff's office was a mess of conflicting orders, and in the chaos, a contractor hired by Crescent arrived with a truck and a crew, ready to padlock Mark's door and change the locks. Mark rushed out into the pouring rain, the shotgun numb in his hands, and shouted to the men. Flashing lights cut through the storm. Agents pinned the crew down and seized the truck. The would-be theft collapsed into a spectacle of handcuffs and rainwater. A few weeks later, indicted charges for racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy were filed against Kessler, Clarissa Doyle, and several Crescent executives. The federal case ballooned into a county-wide scandal that threatened to topple the political cronies who had smiled in HOA board photos. The papers, local and national, ran op-eds about predatory privatization, about the hollowing out of homeownership. Mark watched from a folding chair in Judge Alvarez's courtroom, the documents in his lap like talismans against panic. Yet for all the legal fireworks, the personal toll was brutal. Elena took unpaid leave. The hospital couldn't afford the risk of her being distracted by subpoenas and threats. Their savings, what little they'd squirreled away, got devoured by emergency payments and legal retainers. At night, Sophie woke with nightmares about men in suits and asked if the house would be taken. Mark had to invent stories about dragons and brave knights to keep the fear at bay. His sleep was a thing kept in shards. And then the last, most haunting surprise. Late one evening, the postman, an old friend of Louis, handed Mark a thin envelope. No return address, no markings. Inside was a single, photocopied ledger page with a single line circled. An OC transfer of $250,000 from County Infrastructure Fund to an account under Midland Escrow Services, a firm that had quietly paid legal bills for Kessler's firm. Someone had pinged the edges of the financial web and found a transfer that implicated people who sat on municipal boards and county coffers. It meant that the racket had contagion into public money and, more dangerously, public trust. Mark held the paper like a hot coal, the edges burning his fingertips. He thought of Elena, of Sophie, of Max pawing his leg beneath the table like a small living anchor. If he published this ledger, if Dana ran the story tying public funds to the foreclosure racket, the damage would be irreparable for the conspirators. But it would also risk pushing them into a corner where they might lash out with violence or legal retaliation more sophisticated than threats. It would put public officials in the crosshairs and the Bennetts, already exhausted, into a spotlight they could not afford. He put the paper in his shirt pocket, feeling its folded weight. The case would unfold in courtrooms for months. Indictments were only the beginning. People would face prison, reputations would fall, but the money moved faster than subpoenas often could. The final question pressed cold against Mark's ribs. Could the law unwind what had been done to so many? Or did the system simply absorb a scandal as a cost of doing business? He and his neighbors had toppled one node of the machine, but the ledger suggested the machine's limbs reached further than they had imagined. As dawn cracked the next morning, Mark stepped onto his porch with Max at his heel and stared down the quiet street. The houses blinked awake, lawns manicured and ominously clean. For the first time in months, a neighbor waved hesitantly, Louis in his cap, a tentative smile that trembled but held. Mark swallowed, the ledger in his pocket a hot promise. He had won a battle that saved his home, but the war, the systemic corruption, the flow of money and influence, had only just begun. He tucked his hands into his jacket, tightened his jaw, and walked back inside to the kitchen where Elena sat at the table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. In the drawer where they had once kept spare change, Mark slipped the photocopied ledger page between a stack of mortgage statements. He closed the drawer slowly, and then, with a softness that nearly cracked him, he whispered to the dog curled at his feet. "We did it, buddy. But there's more out there. They'll come for the rest. We have to be ready." Max licked his hand as if to say he understood, and in the thin light Mark felt something like hope, shaky, dangerous, and utterly human.